I am Pops, and welcome to Throwback Thursday. Now, before I get into the video of the show, I want to say someone asked me, why does that say General Cinema or what is that from or whatever? And I said, well, that's actually, if you know what Regal Cinema is or AMC, that actually, General Cinema is actually the company that I worked for when I was in college. So I actually worked in a movie theater when I was in college. I had multiple jobs, but that was one of them. And they went out of business. They're bankrupt. They're gone. I found that clip. I made a few modifications to it there, obviously. Then I kind of put some generic text over it to make it my own, to kind of throwback Thursday, throwback to my, I don't know, my day of the theater. I don't know what to tell you guys. It was a special time. I enjoyed it very much. So, but Throwback Thursday is our chance to kind of like, dust off a film that maybe you haven't seen or maybe you haven't seen in a long while. Those kinds of things. Oh, man, I bought my computer a minute ago. I'm all out of whack, aren't I? Um, the Right Stuff came out in 1983, and I will admit that I did not get a chance to see this in theaters. I saw this it came out late in the fall. It came out on video sometime after that. I don't know exactly when, but I remember very vividly when we watched this videotape. And I remember watching it, and then I watched it again. I I I was so hooked on space stuff, kind of superficially anyway, being into science fiction. Obviously, there's tons of other movies that kind of led up to this. I wouldn't say I was up to date on the history and what things actually happened because this film does take a lot of creative liberties. I understand it can be very divisive for some diehard space people. I got it. But for me, it was a gateway drug into the space program. It was me having a very uh, elementary school level introduction to some of the things, but with some really cool things that made me see them as heroic. So the film is basically about the very infancy and development of the U.S. space program, right? So we go from the beginning part is all about sound barrier stuff with Chuck Yeager, right? And ultimately will lead into the selection of the Mercury 7 astronauts. I will say that if I had to do rewatches and I was watching this regularly, I would be watching the Mercury 7 stuff more than watching the stuff about Yeager, like the Sam Shepard, Chuck Yeager stuff. It's fine. I'm not trying to disrespect it. I don't really care as much about the test pilot stuff. I didn't find any of that nearly as exhilarating or interesting as the space stuff because the way the film transitions into the selection process. And first off, by the way, it fell until I was much older that I catch the fact that Yeager was excluded because he didn't have a degree. He was, this is the snobby elitism of things like this. We don't pick the best people always, only if they have the right kind of letters after their name, right? I also was very unaware of some of the actors, and obviously we didn't know what they would go on to be. But you have Jeff Goldblum and Harry Shearer as the two NASA recruiters. I was like, every time I rewatch this, I kind of smirk and smile a little bit because I'm like, oh man, look at that. That's so crazy, And when the actors and the different officers are coming in. So you have Ed Harris as John Glenn, right? He's like the golden boy, been on TV, everyone knows and likes him. Then you have Scott Glenn does like the comic relief, right? Because he's Alan Shepard. Alan Shepard is cutting up as Jose Jimenez. He's doing these jokes, right? The famous Lance Henriksen as Wally Schirra. You have Dennis Quaid, of course, as Gordo Cooper. Now, Quaid, of course, is just, he kills it, man. You can see, oh, Gordo comes alive on screen. And then with Fred Ward, it's like the opposite, this Gus Grissom character. Is it me, or does the Dennis Quaid, Fred Ward chemistry sound like it could have been part of the pitch to sell Tremors? Just saying. Anyway, I love the sequence. I love the human experimentation sequence where they're having all these crazy things that are being done to them, whether it be the electrodes in Scott Shepard's arms, whether it be, we need a specimen cup and they all are trying to outsing each other with the Marine hymn and the Navy hymn, whether it be the famous scene that I never forgot. It stuck with me the very first time I saw it. I never forgot was them blowing in the tube and holding the ping pong ball between the lines. And Gordo's putting on a show, right? Being so arrogant and full of himself. The record is 90 seconds. So he goes to 93 and then he just stops. and he thinks he's won, like, "Ha, look at what I did," blah, 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 and he looks, and there's, Carpenter and Glenn still going, who go well over 2 minutes or whatever they do. I I loved so much of their chemistry on screen, the believability, how all that was coming together with, the different groups of test pilots and astronauts and cadets and training. And I really loved all that. Just the grueling elements of what was physical and mental was just really interesting. And it immediately made me such a fan of them, such an admirer of their heroism, even if some of this stuff was fictionalized, even if some of these things were exaggerated or taken a little bit out of context. I can dive into the history independently. I can take Hollywood for what Hollywood is. Like, I understand the story about Gus. Gus in the movie is kind of portrayed more as panicking rather than it being more of a malfunction. That kind of stuff has come into play, with some of the different things that happen. When the pod floods and stuff. So there's things like that that happen. I will say that it also gave me like a retrospective look at the space race before I was old enough, right? Because I really wasn't old enough to even know, what was happening, right? Because this stuff, the Russians get there first, and Americans are going to get there, and all that kind of stuff. This predates pops. I know, as old as I am, the stuff that actually happened before me, but it gave me a good look at what the American psyche was. Like, what was the American perspective and the evolution of that, right? The failures that came along with it, the fact that they would send a monkey. The scientists looked at these men as just passengers, right? They weren't really going to be pilots. They weren't really going to be relevant. It was just like, we can send a monkey, a chimp. Um, the mocking that continued even by these test pilots, right? And Jaeger's like, it takes a certain kind of man to volunteer for a suicide mission. Um, that kind of stuff was really, really heavy on me. I really enjoyed that a lot. The movie did not do well at the box office, did not find an audience. I think it probably came out too early, for holiday viewership. I don't know how theater going was in '83's fall to know how it came up against and what it did, because reality is sometimes that stuff happens and then you don't know, exactly, um, if you don't know what it came out against and stuff like that, you can't always explain what the, box office success or failures kind of are in the grand scheme of things. And for this one, I really hadn't done any legwork to kind of look that up. And I would say that, it has been re-released, I think, internationally, but not here. It should get an anniversary screening, but I don't think it's going to. So I'm looking at the opening. Yeah, it was going up against James Bond. So yeah, good luck there. It went up against James Bond. It was going up against the Dead Zone. It's going. The Big Chill was still in theaters. Mr. Mom was still in theaters. All the Right Move. Tom Cruise opened that week. So yeah, it finished seventh. It did not get off to a good start. So it actually cruised along pretty consistently for, well into the Oscar race, because that's pretty much how things would go, right? But it just still didn't make money. It just still lost money. They just couldn't get it over the hump. I think some good reviews here and there kind of kept it in the race and kind of did all right for a while, but it just couldn't do it. It was nominated for several awards. It did well at the Oscars. It won for editing and score and sound, all the effects stuff, right? All the effects stuff. It didn't win for Best Picture, didn't win for supporting, those kinds of things, but it was nominated for several awards and won four awards. But its legacy, it hasn't always been well received because there are a lot of historical inaccuracies, and people really like to nitpick the space program and what actually happened in the sequence, things like that. It is, and it's hard. I think sometimes that stuff can be very, cold or generic or, boring to translate to film. So they try to spice it, but I never want them to go too far. And for this one, no matter what your take is on it, in its time, it was a big deal for some of us. I know it was for me. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it. If you've watched it, tell me what you guys think. If you haven't watched it in a while or never seen it, I'd love to hear even more from you because that'd really be cool to go what your perspective on things are. So, anyway, that's my take on it. I want to thank you again for watching. I am Pops.